The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in orange and purple tones when André Silva finally arrived home. The day had been long and exhausting, filled with hearings and endless paperwork in federal court. His heavy shoulders carried not only physical fatigue, but also the weight of the responsibilities that his position as federal prosecutor required. As he walked through the parking lot of the luxurious condominium where he lived, André felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief at finally being home, anxiety in anticipation of receiving the packages I had ordered. They were rare legal books that would be fundamental to the complex case he was working on. The building's lobby was silent except for the soft sound of the decorative fountain in the center. André greeted the doorman with a nod and a tired smile, heading to the post office area. His heart quickened a little when he saw the brown box with his name on it. Finally, he thought, picking up the package carefully. It was at that moment that a shrill voice cut through the air, making André startle. "Hey, you there! What do you think you're doing?" André turned around, confused, and came across a middle-aged woman, perfectly styled blonde hair and a suspicious expression on her face. He didn't recognize her, but that wasn't unusual since he spent most of his time away from home due to work. "Good evening," André replied politely, still holding his package. "Can I help you?" The woman, who he would later discover was called Renata, stepped forward, her narrow eyes fixed on the package in André's hands. "You don't live here. I've never seen you before. What are you doing with that package?" André felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew that look, that tone of voice well. It was the same thing he occasionally faced in the courtroom corridors, on the streets and stores, the veiled prejudice, the unfounded suspicion based solely on the color of your skin. Taking a deep breath, André tried to remain calm. "Actually, yes, I do. Apartment 1502. This package is mine. I just got it." Renata shook her head, her expression hardening. "Don't lie to me. There have been a lot of package thefts lately. You must be the thief." The absurdity of the situation made André laugh without humor. "Madam, I assure you that I am not a thief. I am a resident of this condominium and this package is mine. If you want, we can call the doorman to confirm." But Renata wasn't willing to listen. She moved closer, her finger pointing accusingly at André. "I know what I'm seeing. You took that package and you're trying to run away with it. I'm going to call the police right now." André felt anger bubble in his chest, mixed with deep sadness. How many more times would I have to go through situations like this? How many more times would he be judged by the color of his skin before he was seen as the respected professional he was? "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm but controlled, "I understand your concern for the security of the condominium, but your accusations are unfounded and, frankly, offensive. I am a resident of this building and I have every right to be here and receive my orders." Renata, however, seemed irreducible. She took out her cell phone, threatening to call the police. "If you're really a resident, you won't mind waiting here until the police arrive to check, will you?" André closed his eyes for a moment, trying to contain his frustration. When he opened them again, he saw that a small group of residents were beginning to form, attracted by the commotion. Some looked with curiosity, others with suspicion. André felt the weight of their gazes, the pressure of having to justify himself once again for simply existing in a space where people like Renata thought he didn't belong. "All right," he said finally, his voice calm but filled with a dignity that made some of the spectators shift uncomfortably. "Let's go up to my apartment. There I can prove that I live here and that this package is mine." Renata hesitated for a moment, clearly not expecting that answer. But then, with an air of barely concealed triumph, she nodded. "Good, let's go then. And don't try anything funny." As they walked towards the elevator, André felt the eyes of the other residents on his back. He held his head high, refusing to bow under the weight of the injustice he was experiencing. In the back of his mind, a voice told him that this was more than a simple misunderstanding. It was a reflection of a much larger problem, a problem that he, as a federal prosecutor, fought to combat every day in the courts. The elevator rose in tense silence. André could feel the hostility emanating from Renata, mixed with something that seemed like fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the different. It was this fear, he knew, that fueled the prejudice and discrimination that still persisted in society. When the elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, André got out first, walking with purpose towards his apartment. Renata followed him closely, her distrust still evident in every step she took. Stopping in front of the door of 1502, André took his keys out of his pocket. He could have simply opened the door and walked in, proving once and for all that he lived there. But something inside him made him hesitate. This was not just a matter of proving your residency. It was an opportunity to confront prejudice head-on, to make Renata and perhaps others question their own assumptions and prejudices. Turning to face Renata, André spoke with a calmness that surprised even himself. "Before we go in, I'd like to ask you a question, Ma-am. What exactly made you suspicious of me? Was it the fact that I was picking up a package, or was it something else?" The question caught Renata by surprise. She stuttered for a moment, her previous certainties seeming to melt under André's firm, questioning gaze. Well, you didn't seem. I've never seen you around here before, and..." André nodded slowly, his expression a mixture of understanding and disappointment. "I see. What if I had been a white man picking up that same package? Would I have suspected the same way?" The silence that followed was deafening. Renata seemed to be at a loss for words, her face alternating between embarrassment and defensiveness. André, in turn, felt a wave of conflicting emotions: anger at the injustice of the situation, sadness at the persistence of prejudice, but also a renewed determination to continue fighting for change. With a sigh, he finally unlocked the door. "Let's go inside. I have something to show you." As the door opened, revealing the elegant and well-decorated interior of André's apartment, the reality of the situation began to dawn on Renata. His face paled, the realization of the mistake he had made finally becoming clear. André entered, placing his package on a table near the entrance. He turned to Renata, who stood in the doorway, looking smaller and less confident than she had moments before. "Please come in," André said, his voice now softer but still carrying an unwavering dignity. "I think we have a lot to talk about." As Renata took a hesitant step into the apartment, André knew that this night would be long. But I also knew it was an opportunity to educate, to challenge entrenched prejudices, and maybe, just maybe, to bring about real change. Understood. I will continue the story with Chapter 2, maintaining the scriptwriter's style and characteristics as described. Here is the second chapter. André Silva's apartment was a silent testimony to his life and career. Bookshelves filled with legal books lined the walls, interspersed with artwork that reflected his Afro-Brazilian heritage. Framed diplomas and certificates declared their academic and professional achievements. It was a space that exuded knowledge, success, and cultural pride. Renata entered hesitantly, her eyes scanning the room with a mixture of surprise and growing embarrassment. The contrast between her previous assumptions and the reality before her was stark. André observed the change in Renata's expression, but felt no satisfaction. Instead, a deep sadness invaded him. How many more times would you have to prove your value, your position, your right to exist in spaces like this? "Please sit down," André said, indicating the leather sofa in the living room. His voice was calm, but filled with a dignity that made Renata shudder slightly. While Renata settled uncomfortably on the sofa, André went to the kitchen and returned with 2 cups of coffee. The rich, comforting scent filled the air, creating a surreal contrast to the palpable tension between them. "Sugar," André offered, to which Renata just shook her head, unable to find her voice. André sat in an armchair opposite Renata, placing his cup on the coffee table between them. For a moment, silence reigned, heavy and charged with unspoken emotions. Finally, André spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Madam." "Renata," she interrupted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Renata." André nodded. "Renata, I would like to understand what happened down there. What exactly made you suspect me?" Renata shifted uncomfortably, her eyes fixed on the coffee cup in her hands. I don't know. There have been so many robberies lately, and I've never seen him around here before." "And that was enough to charge me with theft?" André pressed gently. "Or was there something else?" The silence that followed was deafening. Renata visibly struggled with her words, with the shame and painful recognition of her own prejudices. I think. Maybe. Your appearance, she finally admitted, her voice barely audible. André closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the impact of those words. When he opened them again, his gaze was intense but not hostile. My appearance, he repeated softly. You mean the fact that I'm black? Renata nodded almost imperceptibly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. André took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of discrimination on his shoulders. But instead of anger, he felt renewed determination. This was an opportunity, a chance to educate, to bring about change. Renata, he began, leaning forward, I'm André Silva. I'm a federal prosecutor. I've spent most of my life fighting injustices, including the kind of prejudice you demonstrated today. Renata's eyes widened in shock. Federal prosecutor? I didn't know. And would it have made a difference, André asked, his voice gentle but challenging. If I were a delivery man, a student, or anyone else, would it have been acceptable to accuse me of stealing based solely on my appearance? Renata lowered her head, shame evident in every line of her body. No, she whispered. No, it wouldn't have been acceptable. André nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions, sadness at the persistence of racism, anger at injustice, but also a spark of hope at Renata's apparent understanding. What you did today, he continued, is something that people like me face constantly. We are judged, suspected, accused not for our actions, but for the color of our skin. This is not only painful and unfair, it is dangerous. Renata looked up, tears now running freely down her face. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I never thought. That's the problem, André said softly. Many people don't realize it. They don't think about it. Racism is so deeply rooted in our society that sometimes it's hard to even recognize it in ourselves. He stood up, walking over to one of the shelves. His fingers ran along the spines of the books until they stopped on a specific volume. He removed it and returned to his seat. This is a book about the history of racism in Brazil, he explained, offering the book to Renata. Maybe I can help you better understand the roots of this prejudice and how it affects people like me every day. Renata took the book with trembling hands, looking at the cover as if it were something precious and scary at the same time. I want you to understand, André continued, his voice now softer, that what happened today is not an isolated incident. It is part of a larger pattern, a systemic problem that affects millions of lives every day. Renata nodded slowly, understanding beginning to form in her eyes. I had never thought of it that way. I always thought I wasn't racist, but today, I realized that maybe I have prejudices that I didn't even know existed. André felt a glimmer of hope at this admission. Recognizing this is the first step, he said, the next thing is to actively work to change those biases. At that moment, the shrill sound of a siren cut through the air, making them both startle. Renata turned pale, suddenly remembering her earlier threat to call the police. Oh no, she murmured, panic evident in her voice. I called the police before. I didn't cancel the call. André closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the situation. When he opened them again, his expression was one of determination. It's okay, he said, standing up. Let's go down and clear everything up. As they headed for the door, Renata stopped, turning to André with eyes full of tears and remorse. André, I'm sorry. Truly. What I did was terrible and unfair. I promise I will strive to be better, to learn and change. André looked at her for a long moment, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. He nodded slowly. I appreciate that, Renata. Real change starts with recognition and a willingness to learn. But remember, it's not about feeling guilty. It's about doing better, being better. With those words, they left the apartment, ready to face whatever awaited them below. The sound of sirens grew louder as they descended, a sharp reminder of the consequences of prejudice and the importance of education and mutual understanding. As the elevator descended, André reflected on the night's events. What had begun as a painful confrontation had turned into an opportunity for dialogue and potentially change. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that every conversation, every moment of understanding was a step in the right direction. The elevator doors opened, revealing the lobby now full of onlookers and the glow of the police car's lights through the windows. André took a deep breath, preparing himself for the next chapter of this unexpected night. Understood. I will continue the story with Chapter 3, maintaining the scriptwriter's style and characteristics as described. Here is the third chapter. The elevator doors opened onto a bustling lobby. The intermittent glow of the police car's lights illuminated the curious and worried faces of the residents who gathered at the scene. André felt the weight of the eyes on him, a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and in some cases barely concealed shame. Beside him, Renata seemed to have shrunk, her face a mask of regret and fear. André placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a gesture that surprised them both. "It's going to be okay," he said softly. "Let's clear everything up." As they walked towards the entrance of the building, André saw two police officers approaching. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man, stopped abruptly when he recognized him. "Doctor," Andrew, the officer exclaimed, surprise evident in his voice. "What's going on here?" André felt a mix of relief and irony when he recognized the officer. It was Sergeant Rodriguez, with whom he had already worked on several cases. "Good evening, Sergeant," André greeted, maintaining his composure. "It seems we've had a misunderstanding here." Sergeant Rodriguez looked from André to Renata, his expression changing from confusion to understanding. "Are you the robbery suspect?" he asked incredulously. André nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "Apparently, picking up my own package in my own building made me suspicious." The other officer, younger and visibly uncomfortable with the situation, approached. "Sir, we received a call about a possible robbery." "There was no robbery," André interrupted gently. "There was a misunderstanding based on mistaken assumptions." Renata, who until then had remained silent, took a step forward. His voice was shaking, but it was firm. "It was my fault," she admitted. I made wrong assumptions. Doctor, André is a resident of this building and I wrongly accused him." Sergeant Rodriguez frowned, his expression a mixture of understanding and disappointment. "Ma'am, are you aware that making a false report is a crime?" Renata turned pale, but before she could respond, André intervened. "Sergeant, if I may, I would like to explain the situation in detail." Over the next few minutes, André narrated the night's events, from the moment he picked up his package to the conversation in his apartment. He spoke calmly and clearly, not hiding the prejudice he had faced, but also highlighting Renata's openness to acknowledging and learning from her mistakes. As André spoke, the atmosphere in the lobby changed. The looks of suspicion gave way to expressions of shame and reflection. Some residents exchanged uncomfortable glances, perhaps recognizing their own prejudices reflected in Renata's actions. When André finished his report, Sergeant Rodriguez let out a long sigh. "Doctor, André, I am deeply sorry that you had to go through this. What should I do? Do you want to press charges?" André looked at Renata, who looked like she was about to fall apart. He thought about the book he had given him, the conversation they had, the opportunity for change that presented itself. "No," he said finally, "I don't want to press charges. What I want is for this situation to serve as a lesson, for all of us." He turned to the gathered villagers, his voice firm and clear. "What happened here tonight is not an isolated incident. It is a reflection of a larger problem in our society. Prejudice, racism, they don't go away just because we have laws against them. They persist in our thoughts, in our unconscious actions, on our assumptions." André paused, his eyes scanning the attentive faces around him. "But I also believe that we can change. That we must change. It's not just about not being racist, but about being actively anti-racist. About questioning our own assumptions, about educating ourselves and others, about creating an environment where everyone is truly respected and valued, regardless of the color of their skin."
A deep silence fell over the lobby. André could see the impact of his words in the eyes of those present: shame, understanding, determination.
Renata stepped forward, tears running freely down her face. I want to apologize. Not just to Dr. André, but to all of you. My behavior tonight was unacceptable. I promise I will strive to be better, to learn, to change. Sergeant Rodriguez looked at André, an expression of respect on his face. Doctor. André, you sure you don't want to take any legal action? André shook his head. What I want, Sergeant, is for us to use this experience as a starting point for real change. I suggest we organize a series of diversity and inclusion workshops here at the condominium. I'm willing to lead the first one, if management agrees. The building manager, who was among the spectators, stepped forward. Consider it approved, Dr. André. It's the least we can do. As the police prepared to leave and residents began to disperse, many approached André to express their support and apologize. Renata remained at his side, still holding the book he had given her, as if it were a talisman. Doctor. André, she said softly, I know an apology isn't enough, but I want you to know that your words, your compassion, they changed something in me. I promise I will do the work necessary to be better. André nodded, a small smile on his lips. That's all I can ask, Renata, that we all do this work. As the crowd dispersed and the night returned to its usual calm, André reflected on the night's events. What had started as a painful confrontation had turned into an opportunity for change, for growth. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long time he felt a spark of hope. Going back up to his apartment, André thought about the case he was working on, the books he had ordered. It seemed trivial now compared to what had just happened. But he knew that every battle, big or small, was important in the fight for justice and equality. Upon entering his apartment, André went to the window, looking at the city that stretched beyond. The twinkling lights looked like stars, each representing a life, a story, an opportunity for change. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight and responsibility of his role, not just as a prosecutor but as an agent of change in his community. With a sigh, he turned to his work desk. There was a lot to do: prepare the workshop, pursue her case, fight for justice on all fronts. But now, more than ever, he was determined to persevere, to make a difference one day at a time, one person at a time. Understood. I will write Chapter 4, the final chapter of the story, maintaining the scriptwriter's style and characteristics as described. Here is the last chapter. 3 months have passed since that fateful night in the condominium lobby. Autumn had arrived, painting the city's trees in shades of red and gold, a fitting metaphor for the changes taking place in André's community. The condominium auditorium was packed that Saturday afternoon. André, standing on the small improvised stage, looked at the attentive faces in front of him. Familiar and new faces, all united by a common purpose to learn, grow, change. Welcome to our third workshop on diversity and inclusion, André began, his calm, steady voice echoing through the room. Over the past few weeks, we've been exploring together the concepts of unconscious bias, privilege, and the importance of empathy. Today, let's talk about action. His eyes scanned the audience, stopping for a moment on Renata, sitting in the front row. She smiled shyly, a gesture that André returned with a discreet wave. Renata's transformation in recent weeks had been remarkable. From a woman consumed by prejudice to a dedicated ally in the fight against racism, her journey was a testament to the power of education and the will to change. It's not enough to just acknowledge our biases, André continued. We need to take active action to combat it. That means intervening when we witness discrimination, questioning our own and others' assumptions, and creating truly inclusive spaces in our communities. As he spoke, André reflected on his own journey over the past few months. The incident with Renata, as painful as it had been, had become a catalyst for positive change, not just in the condominium but in your professional life too. In court, André had begun to approach cases of racial discrimination with a new perspective. His personal experience brought additional depth to his argument, making him even more effective in his fight for justice. Each of us has the power to make a difference, André said, his voice thick with emotion. It can be as simple as challenging a friend's bigoted comment, or as complex as leading a diversity initiative at your workplace. The important thing is that we do something. As he spoke, André noticed movement at the back of the room. The door opened silently and a familiar figure entered. It was Sergeant Rodriguez, still in uniform, probably having come straight from his shift. André felt a wave of gratitude when he saw the police officer. Since the incident, Rodriguez had become a valuable ally, working to implement cultural sensitivity training in the local police force. Our work is far from over, André continued. Racism and prejudice are deeply rooted problems in our society. We won't solve them overnight, but every conversation we have, every action we take, brings us a little closer to a more just and equal world. At the end of his speech, André opened space for questions and discussion. Hands went up throughout the room, and soon the auditorium was full of voices engaged in constructive dialogue. People shared their own experiences with prejudice, asked difficult questions, and offered ideas for concrete action. Renata was one of the first to speak. "Doctor André," she began, her voice shaking slightly, "I wanted to share something. Since our incident, I have made a conscious effort to question my own biases. Last week I saw a situation in the supermarket where a black man was being wrongly accused of theft. I intervened. It was scary. But I remembered his words about the importance of taking action." André felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you for sharing this, Renata. It's exactly this kind of action that can make a real difference in everyday life." As the discussion continued, André watched with pride as the community he called home was transforming. People who previously would have been silent now spoke. Those who previously might have made assumptions based on bias were now asking questions and seeking to understand. When the workshop came to an end, people didn't seem ready to leave. Small groups were formed, continuing discussions, exchanging contacts, making plans for future actions. André came down from the stage, feeling exhausted but deeply satisfied. Sergeant Rodriguez approached, extending his hand. "Doctor André," he said, shaking André's hand firmly, "I wanted to personally thank you for what you're doing here. You're making a real difference, not just in this community but beyond." André smiled. "Thank you, Sergeant. But it's not just me, it's all of us working together." As people began to disperse, André stayed behind, helping to organize the chairs and clean the space. Renata approached, offering help. "André," she said softly, using his first name for the first time, "I can never thank you enough for what you did, not only for not reporting me that night, but for giving me the chance to learn and grow." André stopped what he was doing and looked at Renata. He saw in their eyes not just regret for the past, but hope for the future. "Renata," he replied, "what happened that night was painful for both of us, but look what came out of it. Sometimes it is from the most difficult situations that the opportunity for the greatest change arises." As they walked out of the auditorium together, André reflected on the past few months. The pain from that night was still there, a scar that would probably never completely disappear. But at his side was the fruit of that experience, a community that was more aware, more united, more determined to make a difference. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. André took a deep breath, feeling the fresh autumn air in his lungs. He looked at the condominium, at the people leaving the auditorium, talking animatedly, making plans. At that moment, André felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hope that, one step at a time, one conversation at a time, one act of courage at a time, they were building a better world. A world where no one would be judged by the color of their skin, where every person would be seen first and foremost as a human being. As he walked back to his apartment, André smiled. The work was far from over, he knew. There would be more challenges ahead, more difficult moments. But now he knew he wasn't alone in this fight, and with this awareness he felt ready to face anything the future might bring.